20th Anniversary Festival. I hope you all just enjoyed that riveting and incredibly intense first episode of Season 2 of The Handmaid's Tale. I'm Michele Gray, the director of the New York Times live conversation, performance, and screening series, TimesTalks. For 20 years, TimesTalks has showcased world-class journalists and creative thought leaders who have used the arts, sciences, and public office as a lens for change and a platform for conversation. So I have a little bit of disappointing news that unfortunately Elisabeth Moss is stuck in Toronto in an April snowstorm. But as Margaret Atwood and Tina Jourdan so aptly said, she is here in spirit, and obviously you all enjoyed her on screen. However, we're still incredibly delighted and thrilled to be welcoming Margaret Atwood, the celebrated author who wrote the book upon which this show is based. Atwood will discuss the visionary feminist themes of the series and how the progress is neither automatic nor irreversible in any era, an idea that resonates as much today as it did 30 years ago. Moderating today's conversation is Tina Jourdan, the New York Times fiction preview editor and a List bestseller columnist. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Tina Jourdan and Margaret Atwood.
So many people said as they were watching season 1 last year, my God, this is a show for our times. But of course, it had filmed or was filming before the election ever happened. And now that we've seen the first episode of season 2, we see echoes not just of what's happening in our own country, but I think in Turkey particularly, and Russia. Do you think that this would be a very different show if Hillary had won the election?
It would be a differently viewed show. So it would be the same show because the scripts didn't change.
Right.
But the cast and crew woke up, as did I, on November 9th and said, we're in a different show. Mm-hmm. So nothing about the show changed, but the frame changed. So the way people were going to view it changed.
Right. You've said many times that there's nothing in the novel, and in the show for that matter, that didn't happen in real life. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Okay, so the show has kept to that rule. So anything they put in, they've researched. Mm-hmm. And I did that back in the mid-'80s because I knew I was going to get some, this is not believable.
Right.
And I wanted to be able to point to my sources, which I carefully kept. So sometime, someplace, whatever detail is in there has a precedent.
You were saying to me backstage that repressive regimes, while they do always control women and children, they do other things first.
Yeah, the first thing they try to do is control the communication networks. So grab the television station, grab the radio station, shut down the newspapers. That's usually their first move, because then they can control the message. And a number of regimes in our time have been busily doing those kinds of things, plus murdering journalists and bloggers, or jailing them. So this is an old story, but it hasn't gone away. And I think it would be a very good idea for somebody somewhere to make a monument to murdered journalists around the world, because those numbers have been going up.
Wasn't someone just murdered in Russia this week? I think so. Not sure. Yeah. Right. Add to the list, right? So in season 2, will the show adhere to those same rules that everything must have happened?
Yes. Otherwise, you're in fantasy land. So no dragons. I'm sorry about that. Maybe once somebody develops one, then we can put it in, but unfortunately.
Right. One of the things that was so remarkable to me in this episode, which we just viewed, was that, you know, Three Billboards and Frances McDormand aside, we don't see actresses act like these actresses do, with no makeup, no filler, no special effects. And that scene of the hanging, which is where the camera is on her face and she thinks she's going to die, it's quite remarkable. She's really a wonderful actress.
She has an amazingly mobile face, and we've talked about the no makeup thing. And what she said was, when you have on makeup, it acts as a kind of a filter or a screen, whereas when you don't have it, the camera is right there with your every twitch, you know, and they're all, because Gilead is what it is, they're all doing it without makeup, and they're also doing roles that they have never done before. Usually, when you're a young female actress in Hollywood, you're playing glamorous people, and these are not glamour roles.
No.
They're right there people. It's like real people.
Right, right.
But I have to say, Ann Dowd is really the nicest person. even though she's terrifyingly channeling my grade 4 teacher. She petrifies me every time she opens her mouth.
That was the inspiration, I have to ask.
Yeah, well, partly, you know, it's a bit of a joke, but such people have been with us on the planet.
Yes,
put it that way.
I would definitely agree with that. So, as someone who read and loved the novel and watched and loved the show, it's been fascinating to me to see how the writers reach in and pluck out moments to expand upon. You know, they did that in season 1. And I guess I want to know how season 2 will proceed, in the sense that the novel has an epilogue. Could you describe the epilogue for people who haven't read it?
So the epilogue it takes place 250 years approx after the end of the regime. And it's an academic historians conference. And they're presenting the fact that they've discovered this story in a tin trunk hidden in an attic. I love it. In a crawl space in Maine.
In Bangor,
yes.
Maine.
Yes, I love it. I used to drive through Bangor, Maine on the way to Montreal from Cambridge, where I set the novel, much to the displeasure of Harvard when it first got published. I did not like the idea of all those bodies hanging on the wall, but they've come around.
I should think, right?
Yeah.
I should think.
Yeah, they actually published a somewhat snotty review of it in the Harvard.
They did?
They did. How dare they? Anyway, so Bangor, Maine, yes, it would be one of the places that you would head. You would be heading north in order to get to Canada.
Right.
That would be the idea. And I just want you all to know you're welcome.
Yeah.
Nice hot cup of tea waiting for you. It's happened before.
So the epilogue is not definitive.
Yeah, so it's the historical notes, and it's the academics speculating about what order they should have put these tape recordings in, because they were tape recordings, and then trying to figure out who these people were. Mm-hmm. So which commander, and they present various possibilities, right. and who the woman might have been, but of course all of their real names have been removed, and we only know them in the record as their Gilead name.
Right.
And in case her record was found, she doesn't use people's real names.
Right.
As one would not,
right.
by the way.
And I thought it's fascinating in the epilogue, of course, the point is made that very few written records exist from the time because they were so good at destroying everything. Like, that's one reason these tapes have been found, and they're so fascinated with them.
Exactly, yes, they were. And this again is an old story. I think it goes back to China. One of the first, the unifying emperor who came in destroyed all records of history before him so that nobody would be able to compare his regime unfavorably with anything that came before. And totalitarianisms are generally pretty keen on book burning.
Right, right.
So next time you feel like burning a book, just remember that. Don't burn it, just throw it at the wall.
I was talking to some book editors the other day who were mentioning the fact that some of the first novels are about to come out that are a reaction to the election in this country.
That'll be very interesting.
Be very interesting. But they were like, oh, this is going to be the first like art to respond, you know, to the election. And I thought, maybe not. It seems like this season of Handmaid's Tale will get there first.
Yes, I think so.
You think so?
Yes, because because they updated it, they didn't put the backstory in 1985. They put the backstory in 2016.
Right.
Because they did that, they're able to weave in our present in a way that they wouldn't have been able to do had they set it back in 1985.
Right.
So in 1985, just to remind those who weren't born then, there weren't any lattes.
No lattes.
No lattes.
It was just coffee.
It was just bun coffee. Remember bun?
I do indeed.
Yes, bun.
Drip coffee.
Yes, usually quite old.
Burned tasting, yes.
Like that. So there were no cell phones.
Right.
The first cell phones, you can go back and look at old James Bond movies and see them first appearing. They were about this big.
Yeah.
Do you remember satellite phones that you would have in your car? They came in little suitcases.
I did not have one, but
Yes, yeah.
they were large.
They were large, yes. And you see them through time getting smaller and smaller. So there were none of those. There weren't any personal computers, or hardly any.
Right.
I think I had my first Apple in 1990 approx. And it was a thing like this that had a little screen like that. And you put in floppy disks. Anybody remember what those were? And then they would get stuck.
Yeah.
Get a hairpin and sort of pry them out. And your novel would be a stack of floppies about this big, which of course now nobody can read unless you pay them enormous amounts of money. This is the story of old technology, by the way. Be prepared. All of your stuff is going to be unreadable unless you keep all the tech that made it work.
Right.
Plus the repairman who knows how to fix it.
That's right. That's key. That's absolutely key. Do you write all of your novels on computers, or do you write longhand?
No, I'm too old to be like that. So I'm so old that I never learned to touch type. So when the computer came along, I was actually quite happy to see it because I could correct my many mistakes more easily. But I'm sorry that the little box that used to jump around on the screen and say, you seem to be trying to write a letter, may I help you? I'm sorry that that person isn't there anymore because
Yes.
I always felt there was a participant. You know, they've gotten rid of him and something called Bob the Paperclip.
Oh, I can't stand the paperclip.
Well, it's gone. There is no more Bob. Bob is gone.
Bob was the worst.
Well, don't tell me you still have a program with Bob on it.
I don't think so. Well, at home, maybe. Maybe at home. Unclear.
Maybe you're just being haunted by the
by the memory.
ghost of Bob.
Right.
Yeah, I had quite bulgy. Did any of you experience Bob? Had quite bulgy eyes like that. Yeah. No, I didn't like him, but I liked the box.
Yeah.
It jumped around. Anyway, the red wiggly line and the green wiggly line. I like those up to a point.
Well, they tell you when you've misspelled something, which is
According
helpful.
to them.
According to them. True. True. I'd just as soon use spell check myself.
Yeah, I would just as soon do all my editing on a paper page because you can see better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So finally, the final result, that's what I do. But I always start off with handwriting because I'm really old.
Yeah. I want to go back a second to the whole idea of criticizing government through art, because I think that's important.
Very, very old idea.
Is it? I figured you would know.
Yes.
I mean, how...
Some people even think the Iliad was one of those.
Really?
No, there is that theory.
So it's been going on for a very long time.
Yeah, quite a long time. And that's why most regimes have had some form of censorship.
Right.
So the only really crappy play that Shakespeare wrote, I mean, there is a descending order, but the really crappiest is Henry VIII. And why is that? Because, of course, he wasn't going to get into it. He wasn't really going to get into the bad behavior of, of Henry VIII, because Elizabeth was still on the throne. So Henry VIII ends with the appearance of this miraculous child, namely Elizabeth I, but does not go on to show Anne Boleyn's head coming off.
Wow.
Tactfully doesn't mention that.
Yeah.
As one would not.
Yeah, not if one valued one's own skin back in that time, I think. Right?
The other thing that a lot of people don't know is that religious swearing was censored in those times, which is why Shakespeare's swearing is so inventive.
And colorful.
And colorful, but it doesn't use the common swear words, religiously affiliated swear words of the time.
So that's why you see things like "thou cream-faced loon."
That's right.
That's
those
right.
are the kind of things you see. Yes.
I used to see.
But you don't see odds blood or any of those things that people actually said a lot.
All right. In addition to updating the show and keeping, having it be in our time and with the technology we're familiar with, it does seem like it's a more diverse cast than the characters in the book.
Absolutely. In the book, they've gone full segregationist.
Right.
They've gone full segregationist and they've gone full anti-Semitic. So they've made a national homeland for colored people. They've put them all in there, like South Africa at the time. And anybody Jewish has to go back to Israel. Why is that? Because there is a fundamentalist belief that in order for the second coming to happen, all of the Jews have to be in Israel. Did you know that?
I did not know that.
No. Whereupon half of them will get slaughtered and the other half will get converted. I didn't make it up. So that's what these people are doing in the book. But in the television series, because they've updated it to our now, there are a lot more interracial marriages and interracial relationships than there would have been even in 1984. And they also made the decision to have a diverse cast because Hollywood is doing that now. They're doing it deliberately. So they had to rearrange their, they got some criticism because there wasn't enough attention paid to the politics of race, but because it's a series, they can hear the criticism and then they can adjust themselves to it, which they're in fact doing.
It strikes me that this new trend for turning books into shows like this is actually enormously helpful for a book like yours, which really can't be expressed in a movie-length show.
I think it's a gift to longer, more complex novels. You're seeing a number of them come to life in this way. To take a pretty extreme example, you could never put Game of Thrones into 90 minutes.
No.
It's too, it's a huge multi-book saga. But there are a number of novels that are like that too, like War and Peace. Trying to do War and Peace in 90 minutes would be ludicrous.
Yeah.
Although people have tried. But even things like Jane Eyre, for instance. I first saw Jane Eyre as a miniseries back in the 80s. And I think that was one of the first of this wave of making books into the length that they really should be.
Well, was that like Masterpiece Theater? I'm trying to remember.
It was an English production, but I'm sure it appeared on Masterpiece Theater.
Right.
Yeah.
Because that's how I remember seeing some novels for the very first time. Everything from The Moonstone to Jane Eyre.
That's right. Yeah.
Right.
Yes, and they fit that length much better.
Right.
Though my daughter, who was 6, looked at Jane Eyre, and in the last scene, when Mr. Rochester is blind, she said, "His eye moved."
Yeah.
This is also the person who, when we went off to see Lord of the Rings together, she said, "That orc was wearing a wristwatch."
I know you've written about this before and maybe even talked about it, but I wonder if you just discuss briefly the inspiration for the novel, when you started writing it, what was going on.
I avoided writing it for a while.
You did?
Yeah, because as one would, I said, I'm going to get in trouble. So I started writing this other novel, which came to nothing because I wasn't really interested in it. Mm-hmm. And I was writing it in England in a fisherman's cottage that was rented out in the summer, and everybody had left behind their historical novels about Mary, Queen of Scots. Mm-hmm. When I found myself reading about Mary, Queen of Scots rather than writing my book, I knew that was it for that book. Mm-hmm. And but ask me anything about Mary, Queen of Scots. So I knew that I was going to have to do The Handmaid's Tale or else. But what was going on at the time? We were in the middle of the 80s. Mm-hmm. It was a pushback time. We'd had a very active 70s in which all sorts of new ideas about women had come up, and all kinds of, some gains had been made, some legal gains had been made.
Roe versus Wade.
Not just Roe versus Wade, but laws about property rights, division of assets in a divorce. There was a moment when things changed over from the husband always getting the children to the wife always getting the children. Now I think we're more in an area of best interests of the children. Mm-hmm. But all of these things were going on: body image, sexuality. The pill had arrived in 1966, approx, for purchase by you, even if you weren't married. Mm-hmm. Immorality. So all of that had happened, and then in the 80s, the pushback was happening, and people were saying, well, women have everything they want, it's all fine now. And other people were saying, this has gone really too far and women should be back in the home. So my question to myself was, if women should be back in the home, how are you going to make them go there? Mm-hmm. How are you going to solve that problem? Well, the credit card had been invented just for that.
Yeah.
Because it gives you an instant way of cutting off access to money.
Right.
Should you wish to do so.
And as you wrote, nothing changes instantaneously. In a gradually heating bathtub, you'd be boiled to death before you knew it.
And that's true. So small changes first and then big changes.
Right.
And of course, being born in 1939 as I was, I've read an awful lot about Mussolini, Stalin, and Hitler, and how they did it. Mm-hmm. How they made that happen. And a lot of it was through getting hold of the propaganda machines.
Right.
And a certain amount of journalist murdering.
Right.
As well.
Weren't you living in West Berlin when you were writing the book, or at least part of it?
I started writing it in West Berlin in, cornily enough, 1984. Mm-hmm. having been an early teenager when I first read 1984, because that's when it first came out. I was quite impressed with it. Having earlier read Animal Farm, thinking it was going to be like Wind in the Willows.
Yeah,
No. No, it ruined me. It just destroyed me, because I didn't know that it was a satire on Stalinist Russia. I thought it really was about these pigs and the horse that gets destroyed.
So the wall was still up.
The wall was up. Checkpoint Charlie was still there. And every Sunday, East Germany flew their sonic boom airplanes around to just let us know that they were there. And being Canadian, I could go across.
Right.
Whereas Germans couldn't so easily. They made you change a certain number of monies into their money, which you then couldn't change back.
Right, because they wanted the currency.
They wanted the currency, and the only thing you could buy there was really poor ice cream, vile chocolates, and a lot of editions of marks in German. There you go. There were better things to buy in Poland, where I also went.
Right.
And I also went to Czechoslovakia at the same time. And of those three, Poland was the most wide open.
Why was that, do you think?
I think because there was an opposition. There was always an opposition that was too big for them to destroy, and that was the Catholic Church. Whereas in East Germany and Czechoslovakia, which had been Protestant, there wasn't a unified, big opposition like that.
Right. So the resistance.
So Poland, even at the time we went there, was quite open about a lot of things. The taxi drivers would say, "Dollars?" And if you said zlotys, they would just drive away. They didn't. They weren't interested. They wanted dollars. So that was pretty interesting. But in the other two countries, which were very tight, very, I think East Germany probably the worst. You probably saw that film called The Lives of Others. You had to be very careful who you talked to, what you said, where you said it, what was likely to be bugged. And that would include your hotel room, anybody's car, any indoor space.
Right. So all that found its way into the novel.
Oh yes, it was the fact that it was that people not knowing who they could trust. When we did the original feature film in 1989, 90, just as the wall was coming down, we premiered it in West Berlin. And then for the first time since the war, we went across and showed it again in East Berlin. And the audience reactions were very, very different.
How so?
The West Berliners were doing the kinds of things that people do around art. You know, the direction, the acting, the production, and you know, this and that, about the thing as an artifact. The East Berliners watched it very, very intently. And then they said, "This was our life." And they didn't mean the outfits.
Right.
They meant the fact that you didn't know who to trust.
Right.
That there was a power hierarchy and people would move up and down in it and betray one another, but you didn't know who to trust.
Right.
You didn't know whether anybody was who they were purporting to be.
Right. And those actually make some of the most powerful scenes in the book. Offred doesn't know.
You don't know. Well, I think one of the most chilling things in season 1 is when her walking partner turns up and she says, "Where's off, Glenn?" And the person says, "I am off."
I am off, Glenn, right? It's an equally chilling scene in the book, because in the book she then tries to ask the new off Glenn, if I'm right. No? Doesn't she worry
she does.
that then she worries that she's
Given
doomed
away too much.
herself?
Yeah,
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, when you read about these regimes and what small things could get you in really deep trouble, if somebody was determined to betray you in some way.
Oh, they'd entrap you, wouldn't they?
Yeah, or else they would just use some slip that you had made in order to get points for themselves.
Right. Right.
And one of the things that is typical of them is getting children to betray their parents. That happened quite a bit. And vice versa.
Right.
So destroy the family is the idea. Destroy any loyalty except the loyalty to the regime.
Right. I know you've said before, because people always ask you, are you a feminist? And your reply is, well, you tell me what that means.
There are 50 shades of feminism. There are 50 types of feminism.
Right.
And Anne Crabtree looked at 50 Shades of Red before she chose the one for the costumes in The Handmaid's Tale.
Really?
50 Shades of Red, great novel title. So if you put types of feminism into your browser, you'll get a list that's this long. Not all of them agree with one another. So where am I in all of that? I'd say I'm probably a structural feminist, by which I mean I believe in changing the law.
Legal rights for everybody.
Yes, legal rights which are fair, which are equal, and which lead to, parity, all those kinds of things. Because I think if you have those, then attitudes change.
Right. So legal equality, cultural equality, social equality, all
those kinds of things.
Right.
So generally non-discriminatory on the basis of all those kinds of things that are currently discriminatory.
So I really just have one last question for you, which is, did you imagine when this book was published that it would enter the cultural conversation like it did? And how has that been all these years? I mean, it's always being discussed.
Okay, did I imagine it? No. I began it in West Berlin, but I finished it in Tuscaloosa, Alabama.
Which is then.
Which is a different sort of a bookend. And in Tuscaloosa, Alabama at that time, where I was an MFA chair at the university, and I just went back there recently, it's quite different.
I can imagine.
Yeah, at the time, Tuscaloosa, Alabama was the home of the Ku Klux Klan, among other things. And they had a Southern Women's Feminist Conference there. And I said, why are you doing this? Don't you know that this is the home of the Ku Klux Klan? They were going to have the whole shootout, lesbian nuns, whatever. And they said, news travels slowly in the South. They'd be in there and out of there before the Ku Klux Klan found out, and that was true. That was true. They did. But they also said, Tuscaloosa, Alabama is the murder capital of the USA. And I said, oh, that's terrible. Maybe I should turn around and go home. They said, don't y'all worry. They only shoots family.
Yeah.
That wasn't true either. So it was quite different then.
Right.
And you'll notice that they didn't elect Roy Moore.
That's
they
right.
didn't.
Right?
Yeah.
No. Good for them.
So there.
Yeah.
That's a big change. That's a very big change. But there I was, finishing it at that time, and I had a friend called Valerie Martin, who's also a novelist, who was there, and she was the first person to read the manuscript. And I said, what do you think? I said, I think I'm going to get in a lot of trouble. And she said, I think you're going to make a lot of money.
Right.
However, I think I had no idea that it would, of course, move in the direction that things have, but that movement has not been just a wave in one direction. I think this moment that we're in is more like the 30s than anything I've seen, in that there are two opposing cultural forces. And I don't want you all to come to Canada right now, because I want you to stay here and vote.
Yeah.
And I've been pretty, yeah. So I've been very impressed by the way people have mobilized themselves and decided to take this on.
Well, so maybe the book is a call to action, and the show.
Well, let's see what happens. Let's see what happens.
All right. Thank you so much, Margaret. Thank you, everybody, for coming.